Welcome back to my channel. Today we have a guest. His name is Seth Brubaker. Baker. I know I followed that up instantly.
Baker, but I'll
Baker,
respond
there
to
we go.
anything.
Sorry, Seth. All right.
No
So,
worries.
yeah, um, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, if we can go right back to the very beginning stages of, how can we put this? We're just winging it. There's no guideline. It's just free flow. And I thought it'd be kind of interesting to kick off, perhaps maybe about your book that you wrote, right? If you could tell the audience.
Absolutely. That's it. And one, thank you for having me. This is really a cool treat. I really like where you're coming from. So I recently published a book, and it came about earlier on in quarantine. A good friend of mine from high school, I got news that he had died.
Oh,
And he and I were really close, and it just so happened that he was the first person who introduced me to the concept that I was bipolar because of meeting him in county jail when I had gone manic the first time, and I got a bunch of charges, and I was awaiting, to see a judge, and I ran into this guy from high school who was just a great. He was also, he was dual diagnosis, which what they called in those days, which is, he had a profound substance abuse issue coupled with his mental instabilities. He was bipolar one, and later on in his life, he was diagnosed as chemically induced schizophrenia.
wow.
He died. He died homeless. Um, Drowning. He spent, the last, 25 years of his life, in and out of institutions and jail, and he'd have a little bit of time. But anyway, so I get word that my good buddy John has died, homeless in Seattle, and part of the grieving process was reaching out to friends that knew him, because he was just a star. I think he peaked in high school. Really, he was just an absolute star that had a lot of gravity and orchestrated a lot of friends, and he just had a magnetism about him. And so as part of the grieving process, we set up a Facebook page for people to leave, as you do when somebody dies, whether or not it's quarantine or not, you go through the process of telling stories about the person,
Yeah.
relating, what he meant to you, and yada yada. And so I just casually started to jot down the story of when I, met John again in jail, and that turned into a 6-page chapter, and it was tied inextricably to my own experience with mania and being bipolar, and I just kept going, and it was during quarantine, so I had a lot of time on my hands. I was actually doing a web series where it would check in with 23 people around the globe daily about what they were doing during quarantine, what it's like, and wherever city they were and what they were doing, and there also happened to be a goal associated with your time in this series. So I changed my goal to finishing this story, which involved 2 manic episodes at age 24 and 28, and that's how I got the basis of the book, and I ended up re-editing and adding and finishing it up, and finally it was released in December.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, in regards to writing the book during your mania, were you
Mhm.
medicated for that, or was that prior to medication?
uh, the first time that I went manic, I didn't know what it was. I say in the book, the line I use is, the only time I've ever heard the term manic depression was that Jimi Hendrix song. Um, I just didn't understand what it was, why I was feeling the way I was. I continually, self-medicated.
Yeah.
I grew up around alcohol and drugs, and I, leaned into that, ostensibly just to get some sleep or some
Yeah.
peace, but as you know, that um, momentum,
Yeah.
that
Accelerates it.
kindling that gives way, it doesn't respond well to alcohol and drugs
No, definitely
in
not.
any way. No, and so after 3 weeks of just you know spiraling, I ended up being in the care of the county jail. As a lot of my brethren, have reported, that's where they go. And I didn't get any medication. I didn't get any diagnosis from those facilities. I didn't get properly diagnosed until my second manic episode, in which case um, I was once again in psychiatric care, but in Seattle, and they hit me with an antipsychotic of Risperdal. That was
Okay. Yeah.
kind of to ebb the tide of what I was under. And at that point, I had been manic for 3 months, three and a half
Holy
months.
shit. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
quite
that
a
was
trip,
just.
right? Yeah.
I went from Florida to LA to Mexico to Washington on that one. It was
Wow.
uh, it was an incredible
Craziness.
amount of momentum.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know all about that too. And so I guess what I could say now in responding to that, biggest question is, are you medicated now today for what you
Uh,
call bipolar?
No, no pharmaceutical medication at
Nice.
all. I stopped taking anything. I've done the math. I think it's about 17 years ago
Oh,
is
wow.
when I completely, got off of meds. It was a, joint decision between me, my psychiatrist, and my wife,
Nice.
because it was kind of an experiment to see if I could, utilize some manner of self care to, create a balance. And it's a lot of talking therapy,
Oh,
but
yeah.
no drugs.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so when you were on medicine or
Mhm.
pharmaceutical drugs, how long were you on for? What's time frame to
I was
like?
I was on the when I can't got off the mania the second time when I was 28. They had me on Risperdal,
Hmm.
um, Depakote, and I had a prescription for Klonopin for anxiety that I was supposed to, if I started feeling, like I was going to spin, take that, and I was supposed to call the doctor.
Right.
Then later on, when I got together with my wife, I went to see another psychiatrist, and they put me on lithium, and I
Hmm.
was on lithium for about 8 months before
Okay.
I was tapping out on that. I
Yeah.
was hallucinating on lithium. I was
On
I
lithium.
was yeah, I
Shit.
was hallucinating on lithium on a pretty regular basis.
Really? Was it quite a high
I
dose now, or was it moderately,
I think it was really like a lower dose, because it was something that they were trying. They're trying to find my
yeah,
levels,
experimentation?
and
Yeah.
and I wasn't having at the time that they put me on lithium. I wasn't having any overt symptoms of anything, right? Like I felt like I was in a pretty good place.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that is indicative of if you don't need the medication does other things for you. It's kind of like
Well,
it's
that's
like
it, right?
right, right.
Yeah. And I found the same as I mentioned, like being on a high dose and being on that specific drug for 20 years. Yeah, that was insane. I started off on a 300 milligram dose, up to 6, up to 9, up to 12. And they're like, okay, well, your blood work isn't showing you need to be in that perfect bracket. I'm like, well, what's that mean? We're all uniquely different, designed through, our DNA in different variables with everything. So how can you really put me in that box with the rest of, uh, that fractional bunch of people?
Hmm.
And
They do call it the art of medicine. It's
well, that's it, right? Yeah, they haven't mastered anything about it, my God. But more or less saying that in order for me to be functionable, I had to be in that margin that they're scanning with, and so they bumped it to 1350, and I was like, holy! At that point at 1200 milligrams, I was having negative side effects with lethargy, numbness of the extremities, and so on. And I kept, almost crying out to them, saying, like, you can't put me on a higher dose. I know this is corrupting my internal organs right now. I'm telling you, man, like, I'm the best spokesperson for my own well-being at this point, right?
Mhm.
And they wouldn't hear about it. So I was like, well, all right, I'll continue this compliancy with you guys because that's all I've known for 20 years. And you guys and your coats and your PhDs and everything else, you must know more than I, right? So it was eventually when I mentioned as we spoke on the phone, having geez, I can't even spit it out, nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. And I wasn't able to filter the waste, um, with my kidneys. And they said taper off at a faster rate. And so I did. But while I was tapering, I was reading a lot. And that's where I began my spiritual journey, through book sources, meditation, yoga, um, qigong, and just grounding myself on the daily. And I was like, you know what? I'm not really for this medication in any aspect aside from my own, torment and ordeals with it. What I really find is I don't think it's really, as you mentioned, it's an art form, right? They haven't mastered anything. They're alchemists. They're continuously trying to get the right concoction for every individual, and you go through a hurdles like a lab rat. And I really think that if
Yeah.
you can get your diet correct, um, if you have a network of social individuals that can help you, your sleeping patterns and the practices that I already mentioned, you can be well
Mhm.
on your way,
Oh,
healing
and
yourself, right?
100% agree. And I find that probably one of the most important catalysts for achieving that kind of balance is asking and being acceptant
That's
uh,
right. Being
to,
open to
to
things, right?
to help, right? Like if you I mean, I go to great length in the book talking about my theory about uh, how mania expresses itself is no different than the functionality of any addiction, any other mental imbalance, OCD, the PTSD. It is just a way in which that you are processing suppressed emotional energy.
Exactly.
You know,
Coping
you
mechanisms,
don't, yeah, you don't have. If you don't have the ability and the wherewithal and the intent to process it, and you wish to mask it
right?
and you wish to ignore it, eventually that storage area where you keep that is going to overflow and you're going to deal with a serious correction. And I wholeheartedly believe that the imbalance caused by mania is exactly that. You literally just
So,
run. It's like having a seizure. It's like having there's just so much pressure that you can take before
yeah,
you have to act it out, right? So ideally, I use this example in the book is you know we are wired in so many different ways, according to evolution and our DNA and the way our genes express. But if I was wired differently, maybe it would have manifested as depression, right? Like,
yeah, that's what I was thinking too, right? Yeah,
yeah.
but
And,
it's
you know,
sorry, sir.
it's useful.
Yeah,
It's very useful if, you see a lion and you have that adrenaline rush and you run away, you use up that energy and now you're better off because now you know where that lion is, right? Like there is a not, I don't believe, a perfectly negative way of looking at any sort of, imbalance. I think it really does depend upon the individual's intent. I think it really does depend upon how it is you're perceiving what you have. And I think that for the most part, Western medicine and our society and culture in general is really predisposed to making their lives more simple and
Of
making their
course.
lives easier. You know, there's a great lyric in a Marilyn Manson song. Tell us you're ill, take your pill, and we hope you just go away.
Yeah,
You
nice.
know, I mean, it is
I
a
like that.
it is part of the social stigma, right? Like it's like a you know, it's a pockmark on your family if you've got somebody who's crazy. I mean, the man who the team who invented lobotomies in 1950 won the Nobel Prize for medicine, right? Like, so you take somebody that's got some issues and troubles, whether it was, you know, Down syndrome or Asperger's or anything on the autistic spectrum, which, you know, we have to talk more about that. But
Yeah.
uh, you anything that makes your family uncomfortable to deal with you, and you know, the option used to be to remove a piece of your limbic system where you're functioning as a, you know, a vegetative state.
Yeah.
That was so popular. He got the fucking Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
So
Crazy.
yeah, so
Right.
we're coming back, right? So I look at native cultures, you know, how they treat, you know, everything from, you know, individuals who identify as being a different gender or transgender, to, you know, people who hear voices, you know, throughout antiquity. And we're talking about going back to the most ancient of cultures that we have access to.
Mhm.
They weren't persecuted. They weren't
Right.
you know, terrorized and subjugated and made to be a pariah outside of society because they weren't conforming to the small linear boxes. You know, they were looked to for, you know, inspiration. I mean, there's such great books about, you know, the how different artists throughout history would have been diagnosed,
Yeah.
right? Like everybody from all the impressionists. I mean, if you wrote a book in Ireland in the 1800s, chances are you fell into one of the spectrums of, you know, either bipolar 1 or 2 or depression, or, you know, it's stunning how many people who are really responsible for creating a culture, right? Artists, writers, you know, actors, directors, people who really hold our identity in their hands aren't like normal, right? Like I've said it constantly. I said,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, if any form of art has really ever moved me, chances are probably 100% that at one point in time in their lives, if not their whole lives, that person was considered a little crazy,
Yeah.
right? Like there's that
100%.
nebulous zone where, you know, to be interesting, you know, and people can do it with drugs. You know, people have, you know, look at the world of music, right? Like you can't really separate, you know, drug crazy from inherently crazy, from, you know, whatever labels you want to call it. But there is some zone where you're channeling some deep magic from somewhere, you know, whether it's in your Akashic record, or out there, and you're being able to process and connect those dots and making that music. But um, I ramble, but
No, no, go ahead. That's fine, man. I do have one quick question to interject.
sure.
Is what do you think the reason is behind, besides what you mentioned about simplicity for our doctors and the government saying that, you know, we're just going to medicate you and tell you to carry on, you know, go about your business.
Well,
What is the
I,
main purpose behind it, though? Like, it feels like
yeah.
there's a particular reason simply to suppress the abilities of the ones who are labeled, you know, uh, sick or
Oh, I think it's.
whatever,
Uh,
right?
I think that there is a clear path to profit.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the early 1900s, when Western medicine, as we know it, was kind of born. The methodology, um, and if you really wanted to, look into who were the people pulling the strings. Was it, the Carnegie and Mellon and, the Westinghouse and the people who were behind creating the AMA. They really did move to a different way of treatment. It wasn't. They took the study of vitamins out. They took all these things that were extremely effective. Sunlight. The importance of vitamin D, and they literally threw away 500 years of accumulated hard data and totally focused on pharmaceuticals. Now that is a very cyclical path, whereby if you give somebody a pill for one thing, and that creates side effects, and then you give them another pill for the side effects. That's a very profitable business model. So I'm not saying that across the board all pharmaceutical drugs are bad. That's impossible. I absolutely believe that I needed drugs to come off of mania. 100%. The first time I did it in a fucking jail cell, and I didn't. I think it was more like adrenal fatigue, really, when mania leaves you. But ultimately, it wasn't until I started to delve into my own experience and my own psyche and being truthful and talking to people that, helped to raise me, that I was getting any sort of relief from the things that were fueling that fire.
Right. Yeah, I'm in agreement too with the idea that there's massive lucrative profit from this, but it also feels like it's another way to control and suppress the individuals that become victimized by that labeling and scrutiny, right? And to bark against that as a sole individual is rather difficult. You have a team of, again, experts who want to cascade this wave over you to make you feel that you're lesser than, you're beneath, and without some type of training, degree, or something, there's no way in hell you're going to know the difference, that you should be compliant because they have your best interest at hand, which isn't always the case.
Yeah.
I've had multiple psychiatrists and therapists alike, and from what I could gather with my own intuition, the conversation at hand just felt like it was one-sided, that there wasn't time to interject, ask questions. It was just, take this, a quick roundabout, how you doing, and cycle through that every visit. And I was like, wow, this is pretty mundane to go through this and not feel anything but numbness the entire time.
Right.
So,
and not to be always playing devil's advocate, but like, I didn't have the experience of just how difficult it is to describe what it is that we go through to somebody who has absolutely no frame of reference, until I wrote the book, and my mother, came to me in tears, and she was like, I had no idea that that's what you were going through.
wow.
I feel ashamed that I was so ignorant to how, because people want to be comfortable with some sort of pigeonhole that they can go, oh, he's a drug addict, oh, he's got this, or oh, he's got that. And the concept of like saying, no, my brain works differently, my the way in which I process emotions is completely different from you. It's like handing a caveman an iPhone and telling him, oh, just go on the internet and download Zoom, and I'll talk to you in 5 minutes. There's so many different hurdles till you can get. Yeah. So you got to explain electricity, right? Like, there's, there's no good words, especially when you're in it, right? Because your behavior is going to be um, creating its own eventualities and its own, paradigm of, okay, so you are being loud, you're talking too fast, yeah, you're delusional because the line that separates fantasy from reality from you has gotten blurry. Are you aware that there is a line between fantasy and reality? Like, when somebody is in the midst of mania, it's different than just being like hypersensitive or empathic, as I think a lot of bipolar people do tend to self-identify. It's
Yeah.
it's really like a huge spectrum, as all things involving human beings are. That is, it's so difficult to describe. So I'm not saying that because um, uh, I don't think that oncologists should all have to have cancer, right? I think that somebody that has experienced mania has a lot more language and a lot more shared experience to help to navigate people. So, if anything, I strongly suggest to anybody that I talk to, I mean, the process of writing this book really kind of like has created a magnetism where people who have experience with mania, people who have imbalances in their immediate life, they reach out to me, and they want to tell me about their experience, or they want me to talk to their friend, or they want me to so um, it really behooves us who have been through some sort of storm of this imbalance, um, to do whatever we can to see, other people who are, at a different phase of it, to try to help them through. It's a very, very difficult to go through by yourself and blind, right? Like,
Oh,
I
it
mean,
is big time.
there's a lot more, information out there, um, because I think people are sharing more, because it is so empowering. It's very empowering to share your story, whether you write it down just for yourself.
Mhm.
But like I said, like one of the first things I say in the book is, um, the very first maxim that kind of gripped me is that when you go back and you examine your memories, you do it in earnestness and detail, you see that the stories that you've told yourself about yourself are not always true. They're very biased,
True.
right? Like,
True.
you always cast yourself as the hero or the victim or the heroic victim, or you had your rationale for how it is that you acted and how people reacted to you. And it's just not necessarily so. You go back with a different type of focus, with different eyes, and if you want to be honest with yourself, you're gonna a lot of more details will emerge, and it may help you, to, like I said, I didn't really feel like I was helping myself do anything more than cope. I didn't feel like I was healing until I went into those shadows,
Shadow.
that
Right.
that had created this imbalance. Like, I think there's a lot of people that are bipolar that will never experience mania because
It's true.
they're at least educated enough to understand, like, the effects of kindling, right? Like, if these emotional things are building up and welling up, and there's just a lot more resources,
Yeah, there is. Yeah, and
but
also
but also there's no excuse too, right? Like,
there's
if
not.
you go
Right.
out and you murder somebody because you've got some kind of um, idea that they're part of a conspiracy, you did the murder.
Yeah, man. You got to own
You
that.
can't.
Responsibility for sure. But two things I
Yeah.
want to touch on.
Hmm.
As you mentioned earlier in that conversation about really not knowing who you are, and what I think too, I can touch base on that and relate, is from what I'm understanding, you really don't know who you are, as you mentioned, being biased and thinking you're the hero or the victimized character. It's actually the people that are around you that can determine and dictate what your character is about. So who you actually are unveiled to other ones. You know, because we have this delusion, all of us, each and every one of us, whether you're diagnosed with something or not, normal or not, we have this idea in our heads that what we're projecting onto others and doing our daily deeds and routines is almost like we're putting ourselves on a pedestal and we're thinking we're much more than what we really are. But when you hear it
Hmm.
from the mouths of others, that really turns things around and makes you recalibrate your way of thinking and going, oh shit. So it's kind of a good way of correcting the imbalances, and I don't mean chemistry imbalances, but the
Hmm.
imbalances in your life to make things moderate so that you can actually do your shadow work on those aspects of your life that need fixing and conditioning, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, the second thing was I tend to ramble too and I get lost in translation of my own thoughts, right? It's a pain in the ass, man. Um, I guess what I should say, and I'll put it in the description below, but where can people find your book, Seth?
Oh, thank you. I'm on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Kindle and Apple Books. It's under the John Chronicles,
Okay,
Making Peace with Mania, and it's my full
perfect.
name, Calvin Seth Brubaker.
Awesome. Okay. I'll definitely put that in.
Thank you, thank you,
Yeah,
thanks,
sure.
man.
I think the other thing was, yes, now that I'm coming back to that thought, so what do you think it all stems from aside from emotional suppression and environmental conditions? Like, it almost feels to me that now that I have some type of sense of clarity after being unmedicated for almost 3 years now,
Mhm.
and reading a lot, it seems like, as we spoke earlier about different parts of the world, there's shamanism, healings, and so forth. So is that not possibly, and I'd just like to get your opinion on it too, uh,
Mhm.
a way of looking into the different realms? Because there's other ones, like I believe there's different tiers of realms, the higher, lower, and middle, which is us
Yep,
here on
yep.
Earth. And the ancestries, or our ancestors, have left uh, behind unfinished business or mission, so to speak. So perhaps that's a way of kind of enlightening us and turning on the light bulb, so that we can continue what they left behind. Um, does that resonate with you at all, or?
For sure, for sure. And I happen to be of the opinion that we really are our ancestors.
Yeah,
I think that there's a continuation of our soul energy, our Akashic record. I think that we have, uh, and not necessarily in a very linear fashion either, which is kind of a whole nother offshoot. Is our three-dimensional, four-dimensional perception is really just a construct of the limitations of our perception. Like we have,
nice.
if all of if we were access to all of the dimensional angles, we would see that there's no such thing as a past life. We have focus on this particular life in a moment, and it's very real to us. I don't know if you've ever read any of the Seth Speaks material from the 60s and 70s,
No, can't say
wildly
I have.
popular, but it basically gave birth to all the new age philosophies, whether it was Deepak Chopra or Anthony
I've
Robbins
read a
or
lot of his stuff.
Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay. All those kind of spring from the same thing, which is a channeled um, communications from somebody who identified being outside of this dimensional plane. Anyway, one of his metaphors is that what you perceive is like being in the audience of a large theater in the round, and you know that it's a round stage, and the spotlight is illuminating the action on the stage, and it's a very small window wedge of activity that's going on, and you are completely engrossed in that. You are absolutely, it's real for you. The characters and the emotional content and everything that's going on is 100% your focus. But um, in actuality, the whole of that 360-degree stage is also going on. It's just that this is illuminated. This is what you are focused on, and this is what you are seeing. So I'm a huge believer that, we are experiencing those things, and I like the through line of the concept that we are kind of continuing
Yeah.
our story, and we're continuing as a collective too. Like these things that happened in 2020, um, the reaction to a lot of things that were kind of like in the closet feels to me like a collective dealing with that suppressed emotional energy, right? The racial issues, the Me
Nice.
Too things, like all these things got kicked out into the sunlight because the machine slowed down enough to where we could focus on, a little bit more than just the daily grind of how difficult it is, to keep up with, the advertising and all the things that we're, talked to believing it's going to make us whole by buying it. Oh, I
Yeah.
have to change my AirPods are about
Oh,
to get.
no,
I'll be
that's okay, buddy.
hold
No
on.
worries, man. Limited battery life, yeah.
Yeah. Oh well.
That's all right.
Good old Apple. What I was saying is, you know, I think that it works the exact same way.
Oh,
Oh,
you're
there
back
we
on.
go. I think that it works the exact same way. Where when we experience mental imbalance, it can be linked to some suppressed emotional energy. I think the same thing works as a collective. I think the same thing works, with whole cultures. So hopefully all of these are steps towards a much more empathic, compassionate, understanding sort of open society where we're not going to have these problems of inequality. We're not going to have these problems. And if it is up to people to illuminate the way, like I say, through the arts, we know who we are. I mean, finance is great, but do people go home and uh, look at their bank records for enjoyment? Do they live vicariously through their taxes, right? Like, uh, I am part of the artist collective, right? Like we are out there and trying to act and sing and and dance and entertain people, and part of that is like channeling what's going on inside of us,
Right.
and reflecting what we see in society and being inspired by other artists. Um, and I think it's pretty obvious when you have such a high percentage of the people who are bipolar or otherwise affected by some sort of mental imbalance, that they are in that field as well, or they are also uh, directed towards helping people.
Well, that's what I
There's.
think too. I was going to
Mm-hmm,
say, sorry for
mm-hmm.
interruption, but I just
No
want to
worries.
mention that I think that's the key factor here is that we become these box labeled individuals because we're supposed to be the spokespeople, the spokespeople to push that in that right direction to get the ball rolling so that we can be as a collective consciousness. That's what we're here to do. We're supposed to be one, not individualized, because the moment you do that, ego kicks into high gear and takes full functionability of everything you do, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's majorly what's happening with the world. So yeah, I really think that, if you're to sit and meditate on that, that's simply what we're doing. It's not that we're going to be taking medications and trying to correct something that isn't correctable
Mm-hmm.
and feasible with that. Um,
Have you ever heard of, gosh, the name escapes me, but there's a team led by a doctor, and his thesis has been nominated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine, but it's called your grandchildren may be a different species than you, and his focus is on the uptick in autistic spectrum in the last 20 years.
Okay.
And the theory is that these children are upgrades. These children
I believe that.
are more quantum, and they are not, built from the same, operational framework as a hunter-gatherer, because that's not what we're asking our bodies and minds to do. We are, graduate. There's been 23 upgrades to Homo sapien, since the earliest fossils record. And so the concept that, these kids are having a hard time because they're trying to communicate with people who only know one linear understanding of the world, right? Like, their problem is us, right? Like, it's like the like in G.I. Jane. I don't know if you remember that movie from the 90s, but the problem is not having a female Navy SEAL operator. The problem was the men are the problem, right? Like, so it's the autistic kids aren't the problem. The problem is a society of people who are in a very linear one-dimensional plane, whereas these kids can interact with an iPad for 24 hours in a row and have deeply conceptual ways in which they intuit and process information. Bill Gates is Asperger. You can see
it, man.
Right. And so many great people in tech have been, touched, by that sort of thing. Going back to like George Washington Carver and Thomas Edison. And, these were people who, absolutely, if you were given the parameters from the AMA today, they would register on some sort of, diagnosis, and they would probably have been given drugs to inhibit that behavior and that way that they are expressing it. Right. So where would we be?
Yeah. So Seth, so with that being said, is it simply not just another way, as I mentioned earlier, to suppress that ability? Because maybe the higher uppers, the hierarchy doesn't want us to upgrade to our highest potential, because by doing so is like unveiling the cloak, which I like to call the sheep, right? And when that's no longer there, you have the power. The people have the power, not the governments.
Right. Right. Anything that disrupts the status quo is going to be met with, extreme resistance. There was a story of the history of New York City, where every major capital in the industrial world had a subway system already built and running, and it kept coming up against resistance in New York City. They had all the technical ability, they had all the money. The reason why it wasn't built 40 years before it was in the 20s is because of the very powerful lobby in City Hall for a message system and horse-drawn carriage taxis, right? So it was always about money. So I use that metaphor for anything that, if they, discover completely free worldwide energy, you better fucking run for the hills with that patent, because you're probably going to be killed. There comes a time where there's a tipping point, right? There comes a time where technology cannot be suppressed any longer, where there's an obviousness and just like I said, there's a tipping point of interest and energy and momentum that happens, and you'll see that, and I call what's going on, the machinations of the reactivity. I call it the last vestige of the old energy.
Nice.
It's like
putting it.
It's like the newspaper industry just doubling down, the phone book industry doubling down and trying really hard, to continue their status quo and their dominance and their cash flow. But, things will change. I mean, as sad as it is to see whole facets of industry, crumble because of quarantine and COVID, it was really like if you want to just be like a very sterile scientific, standpoint, you saw a lot of brick and mortar retail go under. Brick and mortar retail didn't have a long shelf life, buddy. It wasn't going to flourish in the next 20 years, right? The cost alone of warehousing and keeping a brick and mortar retail shop open when you can order from somebody who has a completely robot assembly line, and it can be at your door the next day for a cheaper price. I mean, that's what's going to govern the markets, right? So, I mean, we have, we're probably seeing, the dawn of a whole lot of new, dynamics and a whole lot of new ways in which we're going to live. I think a big percentage of the people who have been forced to work from home will continue to do so because it makes fiscal sense.
It does. Yeah. And don't you think that perhaps that this whole COVID thing, if you look at it in a different light, as I mentioned to you on the phone, I got a different perspective on that idea entirely. But perhaps for the average Joe, they're realizing that, holy shit, I actually have the time I can invest on myself and my well-being and see what truly is becoming a priority or prioritize things that I might have totally left in the dark. And
number one, yep.
So,
yep.
Yeah, there's definitely a perfect time in that vicinity of this whole chaotic way of living to simplify your life and maybe gain more insight on what you truly want in your life. And yeah, I think that's what's happened to me anyway.
Sure. I like to use the cliche, your time and your energy are your most valuable assets. Be very careful how you spend them.
Yep.
And if you take that to heart and try to really reverse engineer how much time and energy you spend and what you spend it on, is it that important to you to have, a specific strata car and a specific strata neighborhood and a specific strata house when the price for getting those things is you only get to spend 5 hours a week with your children?
Well, that's my
right?
point too, right? I was caught in that roller coaster idea too years past. Gonna have the nice, speedy car, man, sports car, the perfect job, to have that status, and it's like, what the fuck am I doing all this for anyway, right?
Right.
What's the bee's knees to all of this in the end?
Yeah.
What are you gaining? Because of the influential characters who are sitting up high on the hog now, they get everything, but yet they're miserable, right? They haven't worked on their own problematic issues.
Right. More suicides as you get wealthier, right?
Yeah. Typically, man, they're just going to drop off. They're like, "Fuck! I thought this was everything." When I wrote myself to the top of that ladder and looked above and seen that it was nothing but emptiness,
right?
Toss more shit in there in hopes that I can fill that void, and it's just an ongoing gong show, right?
Yeah. John Lennon infamously said, he was always brought up to believe that, if it was material things, that caused happiness, and he believed it, and he bought his first car was a Ferrari, right? With his first big money, and he loved it. He loved it for like 2 weeks. He just thought about nothing, and it made him so happy. And then it was just a thing, and then the next thing that he got lasted even less, and then less, and then until it was just like, Jesus, this is all a sham. It really,
and you don't know that
is,
until you get to that
it's
point.
much more important to spend time with your grandparents, when they're alive.
It is.
Oh, you don't, because think about it. Think about the think about the arms race of information and culture that you're dealing with. How many ads do you see in a day?
Oh,
How
that's good.
many, how many, where is the focus, and it's definitely been on, for the last 100 years or so, just creating consumers. That may change too, because
Hopefully so.
we're getting to a point where technology, automation, they're going to replace so much labor
Mhm.
that it won't even be like the emphasis is on consumerism to a degree. It may be that starts to fade as, more and more of the actual money that is to be made is coming from other, channels. It's like the difference between, the Netflix profit profit corridor, right? So instead of, hoping for box office or putting something out and attracting advertisers, it's neither of those things, right? Like there is going to be money made that has nothing to do with, attracting consumers. It may be maybe something we're not going to even conceptualize yet, but I know that I'm betting heavy on the indigo kids. Let me just put it that way, man. I think
I do, man.
that
Right. That's awesome. Because I was talking
yeah.
to my naturopath about my son who's been diagnosed with ADHD, and I always
Mhm.
try to remind him that, hey, man, walk proud, right? Not overly in boasting, but just know
Mhm.
that, in a humble state, you have an ADHD diagnosing. That's nothing
Mhm.
more than a blessing, son. That's not a curse. Don't look at as a negative impact on you and how you're going to turn out in life, right?
Right.
You're pretty much a star seed, son, and focus on that.
Mhm.
And when we push this content out to people, it's so helpful and insightful for others who are suffering with these fucking labels, man, right? That
Yeah.
gets me right to the core. It just burns me because by giving somebody a label, you're really taking away from their whole essence of being. They're nothing but that label, and that's all they want to,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
spend their time contemplating about. It's this is what I am. This is all I am, and it
Right.
really kind of paves a path for you. Oh, you just kicked off there. Oh, there we are. Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry,
sorry.
buddy. But yeah, it totally paves the road for you when you can't even be indecisive and create your own decision making for the life that you would potentially lead if it wasn't for a diagnosing, right? So
Yeah.
it's really a
Yeah.
kick in the ass, and it's upsetting.
And
So
I think that there's also, the possibility that we can, flip that. I'm gonna switch around here a little bit.
yeah, no worries.
That we can flip that a bit because can you still get me?
Yep,
All
yeah,
right.
very good.
We can flip that a bit because I honestly get to where if I'm not talking to somebody about concepts that are complex, if they don't self-identify as some sort of formerly or currently mentally imbalanced person, I don't even respect what they're saying.
Yeah,
Right? Like I don't have much interest in banal normalcy. So it will like create its own sort of strata of inclusion. When the identification becomes something that is glorified rather than, I mean, it wasn't as cool 30 years ago to self-identify as gay in the entertainment business, but it is completely accepted now. It wasn't as cool to, say you were identify as transgender, or if you were black or Latino, and you wanted to really glorify that and take your identity and own it. It isn't
doesn't happen.
really that anymore, right? Like we are definitely heading in a direction where I
Everything's
think
feasible
that
and accepted, right?
oh, the contributions are uh, completely self-evident,
Hmm.
the contributions that people make to society, and that there's there's no difference between, you know, hiring somebody that has a history of mental imbalance. Like it will become its own, you know, superlative.
Nice. I like that. And that's what I'm aiming for too, by doing this platform, projecting our voices so that we can have some type of identification with what I would say normalcy, that you don't have to focus on the negative aspects of all of this coming to light. And, you know, it's like the domino effect, you know, so that
Yeah,
you speak and other,
now
and you're like, holy shit, I can do this too. Let me jump on a platform
absolutely.
and start podcasting, right? So that more
Now
can
that being
gather.
said, I think there's enormous power in responsibility for your own actions,
Definitely.
right? Like I absolutely feel as if you assign blame to your behavior and your actions anywhere else than yourself, then you are giving away your power,
Yes.
right? So if you want to say that, you know, you're a brilliant actor, you're a brilliant writer, if you want to own that completely, you have to own the fact that, you know, you also got a DUI and also drug. Like you have to, you can't just go, oh, you know, the disease made me do it.
Yeah.
Like I don't agree
Ownership,
with that at all,
responsibility. I
right?
don't
Like I
either,
think
man. Like
yeah,
you are solely the driver in that seat that's occupying that vessel, and the narrator, the author of that book that you're writing, right? 100% fully agree. Now, on that note, Seth,
hmm,
how would you like to take an intermission break just for a few moments,
sure,
and then we'll come back?
right
And
on.
what I'll probably do is either merge them together or have part one, part two, so that people can continue with the audience here, right? All right.
Absolutely. I'm
Perfect, Seth.
here.
We'll see you
All
soon,
right, Ben.
everybody.
All right, buddy.